Wir haben jetzt ein ganz besonders spannendes Panel, das ich nur auf Deutsch anmoderiere. Wir werden dann gleich auf Englisch fortfahren. Habe im Übrigen gehört, dass die Übersetzung, die die AI macht, dass die bei dem einen oder anderen von Ihnen Belustigung hervorruft. Und wir haben uns dann schon überlegt, ob wir sie weiter belustigen oder ob wir es abschalten. Darüber können wir dann später mal abstimmen. Well, anyhow. Moving forward, we will not need translation to English, at least not from German to English, maybe the other way around, since this is a highly international panel, which I'm super pleased to welcome to the stage now. Please give a big round of applause to Lauren Kjeldsen, Mark Erhardt, Surendra Patavari, and Timo Flessner. This panel is called Incentives for a Circular Economy. We've heard a lot about what companies are doing this morning. We talked about collaboration along the value chain. We talked about financing. And now there is an abundance of incentives all around the world. Some call it carrots, some call it sticks. And this is a very, very international panel. Let me very briefly introduce the panelists from left to right. Lauren Kjeldsen is from the Evonik Executive Board, born in the USA, but now based in Düsseldorf. So she has both perspectives. On the one hand, the very US-based perspective, but working for Evonik for quite some time and being responsible for all the additives that we have been discussing this morning. She knows the good stuff that goes into the material to make it even better, and obviously also has the challenge of getting that back out later again. Next to her is Mark Erhardt. Mark is the president of BASF Corporation in Florham Park, New Jersey. Mark, on the other hand, is German and living in the US. Well, Mark, actually, you are not German, right? You have not been born in Germany. You have traveled so much around the world.
I am a German passport holder, but born in Ecuador.
Ecuador, born in Ecuador, lived in Brazil, lived in the US, studied in Germany, but now he's the one with the German passport, having a perspective on the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States. Then in the middle is Surendra Patavari. Surendra, we met beginning of last year at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and you are a Belgian-Indian entrepreneur. You are in the recycling business, and we will learn a lot about why you went in there, because you did it much ahead of time. So you started that business over 20 years ago. So when we didn't even think of circular economy, we come to that. We come to that in a second. And last not least, Timo Flessner. Timo is with Bayer Pharmaceuticals, and he's leading the global production of active pharmaceutical ingredients. So the substances in medication which ultimately make them work. You have production sites all over the world, Timo. So with all the incentive schemes now popping up, I think you have maybe by definition, because you are active globally, a super broad perspective. Perhaps let me start with you, Surendra, because we'll come to the carrots and sticks later on. But what took you into the recycling business? I said much before it was en vogue. How come you engaged in there?
Thank you, Carsten, for the introduction. You are absolutely right. When I founded the company Gemini Corporation in Belgium in 1989, 34 years before, honestly, I didn't know the word circularity, neither did I know the word sustainability. All that I knew, that somebody has to take care of the waste, you have to sort it out, you have to recycle or dispose it off. And my journey began with the business of procuring waste and inspecting every load at the time of loading, every materials, every scrap. So in the beginning, we were more of an inspection company Then we became a logistic company, transporting waste from middle of nowhere in Europe and US across the continents. And at some point, we started to buy recycled material processed from our scrap. And we found ourselves what we call today circularity business. We collect waste from over 1,000 locations in 60 countries every month. And we help reuse over 2 million tons of scrap and off-grades. When it comes to incentive, they play a very important role. I'd like to share my experience. I believe when it comes to circularity, we have to look upon the world from two different lenses, one from the developed country lens and another from the developing world. In developed world, we have sound infrastructure waste management system, but in developing world, they don't have the system. Over 2 billion people do not have access to the waste management system. It's the waste pickers. I'm so glad that you have prominently displayed all across the waste pickers. Here, they are given proper importance. It's the waste pickers who collect the waste in those countries, and there are 15 million waste pickers. So when we incentivize them, then the circularity would increase. When you improve the livelihood, the standard of these waste pickers, I like to call them reclaimers to give dignity to their profession, but the waste picker is the word well known to the world. When we improve their livelihood, the collection would improve, the recycling would improve. With this thought in our mind, we started a project in India of installing free of cost small baling machines at the premises of community of waste pickers. And in exchange for this free of cost installation, we asked them 4 commitments: no child labor, payment only through the banking channels, registration with the legal framework of the country, and delivery of certain quantity at the market rates. In the initial period after the installation, when our auditors went for inspection, we still found the children working there. And when we confronted them, they confessed that our children have nothing to do after school. Then we arranged games, we arranged televisions. Now we have installed 30 such mini baling plants in India. And every month we have 10 such waste pickers being addressed to. This project clearly shows that the plastic pollution problem is not only an environmental problem, it's a social problem.
Is plastic the one problem that concerns you most?
While we address other issues as well, we do 2 million tons of different kind of scrap, paper, metal, rubber. But when it comes to the plastic, the issue is much more serious. And I don't know whether I should continue the next 2 minutes, but that's the most important thing I'd like to share with you. The issue of plastic waste is much more serious than being led to believe. Every day we generate about 1 million tons of plastic waste, 1 million tons, 350 million tons every year. And at the present speed, the quantity would increase 3 times, 3 million tons per day in 30 years, almost 1 billion tons of plastic waste. And at this speed, I repeat again, there would be 12 billion tons of plastic waste around us, something our great children, grandchildren would never forgive us. So that's why we give more importance on plastics.
So actually, you didn't need an additional incentive. It was incentive enough for you to see the social conditions in India and to see the environmental problem, and then you said, "Now I do something about it," which is great. Now, if we move to Europe, we have a Green Deal, circular economy action plan. There is billions and billions promised. Lauren, it's very hard to keep track of what's going on. If I may ask you to shed some light on the incentive schemes, what is the Green Deal for you, the Circular Economy Action Plan, and how can you as Evonik tap into that?
Yeah, I hope this is working. Yeah, sounds good. So now you're going to get an American accent to give you an insight into European legislation. And I think in a few minutes you might get a German accent to give you about the American legislation. In general, I think we were pretty excited. I'm coming from the chemical industry, of course, and when the Green Deal was announced, I think in general we got in the chemical industry behind it quite quickly. We saw it as a plan, a strategic plan to have a sustainable economy going forward. And knew that there would be some pros and cons to it, but said, okay, a path going forward. How by 2050 we could be in a net zero working environment and really make a sustainable economy at it. And as the years and time had gone by, as you got into the, let's say, Circular Economy Action Plan, as we drove into energy topics, and then, of course, external factors, such as, the energy crisis we're in now, the instability that we see to the left and to the right, and all of our neighbors in the European setting, made the appetite for investment really shrink, really dry up. And so what started as very interesting, let's say some carrots out there saying, hey, we move in this direction, 20% recycled content by this time, reduction in CO2 emissions, even with the Fit for 55. This appetite to sink money into a very questionable situation became harder and harder. And as we see the development of some of these plans move forward, the details that are gone into start overlapping with other legislation. So for example, all of us in the chemical industry, we know the REACH topics, we also know labeling topics, and then we start seeing topics with end of life starting in which materials can be used or not being used. And then you start in this web, which starts to feel more like the stick than the carrot. So I would say from the start, relative optimism. Some angles of it, incentivization, really having people pull, saying if it's going to be 20%, I better be there, right? And then the other side, this drying up of atmosphere to invest because of risk adversity, cost structures, and then this intensive regulating aspect. So I'd say it's a mix of both, and as maybe a comment to bring a little light at the end of it, I think if we can get the appetite to invest, the appetite for that risk, the willingness to say this is the place to do it because I will be received warmly, this would really help as an incentive alone to continue all of the ideas that we have in place to make it a more sustainable, more circular economy.
So we really need to take care not to turn it into too much of a stick. Yeah, it sounded very promising in the beginning, but now it's highly directive. And so the opposite is sitting right next to you, Inflation Reduction Act, Mark, which is much more than simply tax breaks. This, for some companies, it seems to be our man on the moon moment. Yeah, so von der Leyen was speaking of man on the moon moment, but actually it wasn't the Europeans who went to the moon first, but the Americans. So are we running into a similar situation again? What do you see in terms of incentivization in the US?
Well, I think first of all we have to see that, and being both from the chemical industry, that there's a desire for change. And we come from an industry that has a very long history, and to be a positive contributor to the change that we want to see while we're here in the Circularity Forum, we need time, we need capital. We heard it from Harald Schwager this morning, and we need the right conditions. And there are two ways of how you can approach and effectuate the change. The choice that Europe has taken, mostly through the Green Deal, is top-down. And a lot of thou shall not. This is how you will do it. This is the technology that you will use. And the US went another way, which has always been a successful way, is make a business case out of it. Mm-hmm. So from that perspective, what the Inflation Reduction Act and the Department of Energy grants demand of you is that you compete to secure support, that you first put up skin in the game and commit to be accountable for what you bring. And that has led them now to really a run, or as she correctly said, a higher risk appetite. We're moving now forward with new technological ideas that in our normal processes in our companies would probably push it to the back. But since if you give yourself too much time, you will miss out on this support that you will have here. So it's a diametrically opposed attitude from that I believe is also gonna generate a lot of positive side effects in the North American economy with the reindustrialization of that continent.
Did I understand that correctly? Is this external application process faster than internal processes usually?
We were surprised, yes. So for instance, if you look at the Department of Energy grants, I moved over in May and they were already full in preparation. There was a very strict guideline, submission dates at the end of the summer. We had Q&A sessions with the Department of Energy and their externally hired consultants to vet our proposals. We will get feedback in January or Q1 if we made it, and then we can negotiate with the Department of Energy then the contract by which we would have access to the Department of Energy grants. So very, very stringent and fast, in my view, processes.
Wow. And which order of magnitude sums are we talking about? Is this
high triple million numbers, even higher?
High triple million, wow. Thilo, high triple million numbers available all over the world, or doesn't that apply to Bayer Pharmaceuticals?
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about incentivation or incentives, it's often the dollars or the euros or whatever in our mind, and I think it's much, much more than this. For us as a company, the biggest incentive is if we can make a business out of what we're doing. Our mission is health for all, hunger for none, and this is closely linked to sustainability, to circularity. And from our perspective is, of course, whatever kind of better financial conditions you get, if it helps the business, it's all fine. But it's significantly more than that. I think it's really conditions that need to be the right ones around us. So I'm in the pharmaceutical industry, a very regulated area, a very regulated industry, and for us it's sometimes very hard looking across the globe from the various regions, countries, locations, to get your changes into your products. Because the regulating authorities, which are in cases local in countries or in regions, have completely different views. Mm-hmm. So the biggest incentive for us would be if we would have more stringent global processes, more easier things to change, an even stronger view on scientific data, on facts, that are relevant for decision around the globe. And then on top comes, I don't know, tax conditions, whatever kind of financial advantages you might think of. But we, and I can speak for Bayer, we clearly do not go and look for financial incentives. That's not the main goal. We are clearly committed to ensure a business that can only be successful if it's a successful business without incentives. The biggest incentive is under the conditions that you have, you can make your business, you can earn your money.
Okay, so does it mean you're not currently, or you're not too much influenced by the sums which Mark mentioned, the triple-digit millions that could be accessed? Because we need to get over that initial hump, the first investment, the opportunity to scale up, and
of course we are in considerations of doing things like that, and we have applications where we actually are part of grants. Of course, it's in our case it's by far less. It's a lower number, but of course there are things. So I can speak about my unit or my organization. We currently have two-digit million, so yeah, it's a lower million number of grants together with universities, with clinics to move into specific things. We are currently in a in an advanced process, not fully finally decided. It's a single-digit million grant that we are going for together with others, where it's about a specific electrochemical process with some innovation potential linked to sustainability, linked to circularity, and that's of course something we are part of, and we take the profit of, but we are of course contributing to the success of it.
Okay. Mark, please.
Carsten, but just also to put into perspective, because in the panel before ours, in this morning, the issue of carbon capture, either storage or use, kept coming up. If you look at how, because in itself, especially storage, is not financially attractive. It only costs you money to abate the CO2. But if you create an environment in which carbon capture and storage first, because the use part still needs to be developed, depending how we can get it into our feedstocks, it all of a sudden becomes attractive to drive projects that take care of that CO2, and you have the benefit. So you have effectuated the change that you wanted by making it a business case. And so that's it's not in the sense of that the regulator is trying to pay out something. It's how do you effectuate the change you want to have? You know, in the end game is we want CO2 out for now, and not in the atmosphere.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more that there's multiple technologies in which to do it, and being open to the different technologies is super important, right? I mean, we just spent a last bit of time talking about the hydrogen economy and what role the hydrogen economy will play. Of course, we talk a lot about different battery systems, storage of energy. We talk about carbon capture and usage. They all come at different time spans. They all come and address different topics. So I think there's enough space for these technologies throughout the globe in many different applications. And rather than debate the whole system out into a roadmap, if some of the framework, and this is why I'm also not opposed to the Green Deal concept, that it paints some big high-level roadmap out, it helps an industry. It helps an industry with those big, let's say, stakes put in the ground where we're going. But the rest of it really, if it gets too tight on this, you miss the point, right? You miss the point, you miss the speed. And another comment that's maybe a little bit different than North America is you end up with 3 different countries, let's face it, between, you can decide Mexico, the NAFTA region, you end up with 3. In Europe, it's completely different. So if how I do my mass balance in one region is not what you considered your mass balance right over the borders, whether it's Flanders, whether it's the Netherlands, whether it's Belgium, this is also a pretty frustrating situation to be working within. So if we could get at least a couple of common grounds, you know, from the European Parliament on what is a recycled quota, what is a mass balance on this topic, the security comes with that. That if I go and put in capital, I mean, I don't want to only go to recycling, because circular economy is far more to me than just recycling. It's just we're on the tip of the iceberg in implementing some of these things. 2.6 billion is out there in spend for chemical recycling, and we're still debating, you know, what is chemical recycling? Is it fuel use exempt? Is it not? Is it allowed? Is it part of? Yeah, there's 2.6 billion sitting out there with a view of about 8 billion by 2050 for at least dealing with one of the most relevant topics right now is single-use plastics, right? So if we can get those basic pegs in, whether I get the tax incentives, I'd like them, and I always have a business case, but if I don't get them, can I have the entrepreneurial spirit to make my own business? Yes.
So, in a sense, clarity of objectives and clarity of pathway would also be an incentive already. Yeah? So you're saying, give us more clarity. We don't necessarily need the money. It's helpful, but definitely what we need is way more clarity.
Standardization.
Okay.
Clarity and standardization.
Can that well, Lauren, you mentioned how difficult it already is here in Germany, the Netherlands, yes, so even in the tripartite region here. How can that be accomplished? Is that a realistic ask, a realistic incentive to have standardization at a broader, maybe even a global level?
I mean, we have always should be realistic, but I mean, Lauren talked about European Union, and that should be possible. If it's not possible in the European Union, where should it be possible before we look into global things? And that is really something we struggle with sometimes, because we have all these different kind of factors and KPIs that we track and conditions that we need to tackle. So when I look into Spain, when I look into France, when I look into Germany, it's different conditions. Mm-hmm. And why is that? That should not be the case. That's clearly something that I can say here.
Surendra, you got the European perspective, but at the same time you got the Indian perspective. Now we are talking about clarity and funding. How's the state in India on that? How much clarity is there on the EPR schemes? How much enforcement? How much funding? What is the world in India in particular?
In India, it's still in the infancy stage. I believe to be incentive to be really workable, it must equal to the cost of externalities. If the incentive do not exceed, for instance, in case of plastic, if the incentive do not cover the cost of collection, cost of recycling, cost of sorting, it won't work. In India, the EPR fees are so low, ranging from 10 euro to 40 euro, that it's not effective. Besides, the enforcement is very weak. They made it rather stringent. They came with suddenly an over-explosion. So many documentation, didn't have enough time. Therefore, they have issues at the moment. But it's in the right direction. EPR has to be there. Somebody who's polluting the atmosphere must pay. And they made this sticks policy, to use your word, that the plastic polluter must be responsible for recycling between 30 to 70% of the plastic which they throw out. One good thing India has done on circularity, they have mandated the use of plastic waste in the road construction, 8 to 10%. That's a positive directions. But apart from this monetary incentive which you're talking about, there needs to be some fiscal incentive as well. Like in US, you have the EPIT system. The goods which are made from processed, recycled, or circular economy, they get preferential treatment in the public procurement system, in the tender system. For instance, when you buy electronics, there is a preferential treatment. They are waiving or reduced VAT in Korea, for instance, when you buy things which are made from circular economy. There are incentives for additional depreciation allowance when you are using machineries for circularity. So we have to look at those incentives as well, to look at the situations from that point of view. You may call it plastic credit or incentive or levy or tax. You can give whatever name if it's forced from the government, but it has to cover the cost of externalities, that's for sure.
Lauren and Mark, Timo already gave us an example of an investment which was triggered or which you are working on. Can you also share examples either from Europe or from the US that you are pursuing?
Yeah, so I can share an example where we recently just made a decision to make an investment, which is with our hollow fiber membrane business in Austria. And it was, I would say, mostly driven by, of course, an excellent business plan. I mean, membranes are doing really well. Biogas applications are growing, and this is all a strong business case. But the willingness for the local authorities to expand in such technologies, and you know chemistry is chemistry, right? But the willingness to know that that is part of our economy, that is part of our industry, and to pull it and say, yes, we want you here and to continue here, this is a massive incentive. Yeah? And then working with all of the utilities, all of the topics left and right, and making sure that happens in time is already a major incentive. And I have other topics a little closer to home, where we're discussing, and small modifications become complete new discussions of releasing grandfathered clauses because it's really new manufacturing, and you get the feeling, I'm not sure you really want this industry here, right? Mm-hmm. And so in some cases, I would say I would pull more on the side that it's part of a healthy economy to have a certain amount of industry in it. We also have discussions recently in Singapore because we announced a recent investment in sodium methylate in Singapore, which is for biodiesel catalysts. We can discuss that another time. But the point is that even a small population, a small city-state believes they need a solid industry and that they need an ecosystem of industry there, that they have the leverage in the game and a good setup to make some independent choices on where the direction of their nation goes. And this is 4 to 6 million people, depending on how you count it. And so advice from my side would be looking at the European Union and also in the strong industrial nations to pull, even though it goes against the popular discussion sometimes, what industry is, it's a part of an economy. And we all appreciate the benefits from it, then we all have to also have a skin in the game, if I can steal the phrase, yeah.
And I think we should pick up on what Lauren just said. You know, we thrive when we feel that the regulator wants us in the ecosystem. And an example that you see today, and we also heard it from the panel this morning, ammonia production worldwide has to grow. And it's public knowledge, there are a lot of investments having been announced for the southern United States, which couple an unbeatable gas price, because it's a very energy-intensive process. And with the added credits from the Inflation Reduction Act on the carbon storage, it really becomes very attractive, you know, and that's why the ammonia producing industry will go to the southern United States as an example. But, and Lauren also said it, you need openness to different technologies. If you look at the IRA, it has all these letters, Q, V, W, whatever, because it's for different things. So you can go after different feedstocks, and you get credits. You can go for carbon storage. So there are different classes that allow the engineers to try out and scale up things to make it a business case moving forward. So we're looking at, going from bioethanol to olefins. That is for us in the chemical industry at the beginning of the value chains. Those are great opportunities. Where you go in and look at off-streams, CO2 off-streams from your production and consolidate them and pass them on. How you can work with waste and then bring it back into endothermic processes by burning them. So all those are available.
Mark, if I may follow up on that, is the US, is it really open to try out different technologies? Is it investing and funding in a variety of areas? And the most important thing for the regulator is that you go for it. So you get the funds, and then you have milestones which you need to meet. But first and foremost, it is important that you do it, so that in a couple of years we know which technology can scale up and is best.
I think that the regulator in the US, and it's a bipartisan effort, so that's also very important. So a society has decided we have to change, And when the business people say, well, yeah, but the consumer is not willing to pay, or we're not there yet with the technology, you say, okay, let's create a framework to make it there. And that's the difference. And then, and that's something that I really appreciate, the openness. It's like we have the discussion, well, the internal combustion engine is out, it's only EV and only this. Mm-hmm. Let the market decide over time, and let the technologies compete against one another, because in the end, what will go into the scale-up is where the experts say it's the best, and it will go in there. Now, you might have to adapt because of any side effects that it might have, but that is, and I think in economies that are open, that's the way to go.
So we have the risk of an over-regulating stick here in Europe. Okay. So, Rande, you also wanted to add on that?
Well, I wanted to add to Mark's remark on the waste. When you talk about circularity, you immediately think how we can use the waste into reusing the product. And I believe because of the over-regulation here in Europe, we are moving all our waste business to US. Even before the IRA came into the picture, we have a Basel Convention, which was made with good intention. At that time, 10, 15 years back, there was dumping of waste from the Western world into the developing countries. It was meant to stop that, but the same act has become a deterrent for increasing the recycling activity in the developing world. The Basel Convention is so restrictive, even for the movement of waste between the two neighboring countries. So you don't have enough waste in developing world. Sri Lanka doesn't have enough to have its own economy of scale, even if it wants to import from India. So these restrictive regulations have become so outdated. I think we need to have a fresh look. US, fortunately or unfortunately, never signed such agreement. They're very smart. So all the business which needs to move on the waste goes into US or from US to the different world. So we have to look at the regulations as far as the waste is concerned from a complete different angle. You talked about chemical recycling. I have been doing the shipments of waste for mechanical recycling in quite a substantial quantity. I thought we create a structure to bring feedstock for the chemical recycling into Europe. They need desperately feedstock, prepared feedstock in the chemical recycling. We were the first one, the brave one, to think to bring one container load from developing world, well prepared, into Belgium. Well, the country said, no, you cannot bring it. That doesn't go as far as the Basel Convention is concerned. You have to separate polymers, polyethylene, and PP separately before you bring it here. I spent 500 hours to convince the authority, and still I'm not successful.
Timo, you said you had an example.
I can add another wonderful, I fully agree. I can add another wonderful example from our business, from the contrast media business. It's actually, we produce a specific product, and there's iodine in this product, in this molecule. So iodine, yeah, pretty important, not so easy to get, pretty expensive material. We have a process where iodine gets out of the manufacturing process basically as waste, and we recycle it really. And in principle, we could bring it in at the very forefront of our manufacturing process and could reuse it directly. This is not possible for regulatory reasons. We have to ship it somewhere into the world. Someone needs to do something with it. So a lot of manufacturing activities to further purify it, although scientific data so tell us we could use it directly, but it's simply not allowed in a good manufacturing practice kind of environment, regulatory environment. So it's a wonderful example. You have a plant, and next to the plant you have your circularity, your recycling machine. In principle, you could put it back in directly, but you're not allowed to.
That's for sure something to be overcome. Let me for a second come back to the question of how to actually access those incentives which are around. Mark already alluded to that. You said there is very stringent processes. You get like an RFP from the Ministry of Environment or from the Department of Energy, and then you can apply for funds, and there is a very strict process. Do you have any learnings from what you have done over the last couple of months on how to optimally deal with that? Any recommendation to the audience, knowing that perhaps the American way may not totally apply here, but how can one prepare for this new world where, in principle, a regulator is willing to invest?
So there I have to admit that we're in a very privileged situation as a global transnational because of the quality of experts that we have. Let's start with anything coming with the IRA. You have to have a top-notch tax department that knows how to navigate. Because if you do it wrong, you're going to pay a lot of money in fines because you try to do something with the state. Right? So that is, the quality of your people is very important. Second, it's a multifunctional effort. You've got the business unit that has the asset. You have the advocacy group. In the US, it's usually in the legal department. In Europe, it's more in the communications department. You've got, obviously, your finance experts, your technology experts, and everybody needs to work in concert to prepare the submission. And then the submission needs to be in an equality because you're committing yourself as a legal entity to something, and you'll be liable. Who has worked in the US knows that liability questions are big ticket items, right? So it has to have a high degree of professionalism. So you also see that these programs are geared towards mature companies, that are operating at scale. So to be successful, you need to invest in your people, in your expertise, and manage it like any other project that you have.
That sounds like a couple of man years going into individual applications, and it all needs to be super well orchestrated across the company. Is there an opportunity for a mid-sized company to do that at all?
I was just going to comment as well. So we have a little experience of also in the U.S. doing such type of processes. It's definitely a learning curve. So when there's a bunch of funds available at one time, now it's not you just need one group of people somewhere. You're motivating 3 or 4 different projects and different topics, whether it's CHIPS Act, whether it's Inflation Reduction Act, and I would say it's hard work. We talked about this for a couple seconds before we got up here. I heard earlier this morning, it's very fragmented and lots of applications and you just give up. It's hard work. It's not fun. The teams also get sometimes a bit agitated with one another. It can also be, as you're applying through these topics, what's my part? Why is this not coming through? I didn't know that this needed to be done at a certain time. It's hard work. So if you would like, and I don't know any other administrative process at a very regulated level to be otherwise. Whether you're immigrating somewhere, it's hard work.
So there is no silver bullet to,
it's always
no
good
shortcut to
if we
those
can
funds.
make it easier. I know at least when I was applying to university in the US, they had a universal application. So I didn't have to apply to 30. I could do one application and somehow that was managed. So I think there's ways you can make things easier, but very regulated topics, it's hard work. Yeah.
I'd like to add that recently we had a conference in New York Stock Exchange of Alliance to End Plastic Waste. It's a CEO-led alliance which has substantial funds at its disposal. And we had invited Mr. Jigir Shah, the head of Department of Energy. His view was different. He says, I'm sitting on $40 billion waiting to be distributed. And he specifically mentioned that our grants are very clear, direct. You do this, you get this. You do this, you get this. He tried to give the impression more as a distinction from the European situation. In Europe, things are not as clear as in US, we have tried to make it distinct, clear, unambiguous. You do this, you get this. You don't do this, you don't get this. That was the message we tried to give.
So maybe trying to summarize this. There is carrots and there is more sticks in Europe. There is emerging schemes in Asia, especially in India, where you said, Timo, it may not definitely be necessary. It's a nice add-on to be financially incentivized, but what I'm hearing more and more is, first of all, we need transparency and clarity about which way to go. So there must be a clear framework, transparent, and then once you want to go into the application for funds, you really need to get your act together and well orchestrate all the activities within a company. Mark said, as BASF is a truly multinational player, you can do that. You have the capability. It will be challenging for smaller companies. Is there a chance that smaller companies could piggyback on what you do? Is there some kind of cooperation? You mentioned the university corporations, but if this is such a massive effort to get to the funds which are earmarked somewhere. They are waiting, and Surendra just said there is billions and billions which cannot be invested because the capacity is lacking. So what is the type of bigger time collaboration that we could strive for using you big multinationals to move forward?
I mean, I can start. From our perspective and my personal perspective, that's a very important thing, especially speaking for a large company. I really think we already did part of it, but we need to do more. We have to work together. Yeah, and this is why we're here. We are in the Circular Valley Forum, right? With startups, with innovative companies, with huge innovation, new technology, and we need to do things much more together than we did in the past. And this is something that is going on and that is being continued. But this is really, from my personal perspective, really something. There's huge value in supporting this. From regulators, from governments, from commissions, to drive interactions. Of course, on a non-competitive level, you all need to do this in a compliant way. But I strongly believe there's huge benefit on working together. Academia, startups, mid-sized companies, large companies, and there's so much potential in there for all the companies, for all the businesses, that we need to do this together. And we need to find the right framework for this.
So I think a way to collaborate, or the piggybacking that you're referring to. So we don't have all the answers on the technology front to try out new things. For instance, we're not a photovoltaic company. Now, to eliminate my scope 2, I need to get access to green electricity. And I'm sitting usually with my larger chemical sites in the southern United States with a lot of sun. And I usually have a lot of space. So the piggybacking would be if I find someone that is really good at developing solar parks with better panels, better transmission. You tell me that I can eliminate my scope 2 and I can apply for the tax breaks and basically make it worth their while, that they bring their technology.
Super. We could continue for quite some time, but in 15 minutes we have the Minister of Economy here. So I would like to thank you very, very much indeed for this big-time collaboration that you showed across the companies here. You are moving ahead. Politics is willing to come along. We saw it this morning with the signature of the MOU. We have science on board, and that is indeed very much in the spirit of the Circular Valley, that we all take on this big challenge together. I'd like to thank you very much indeed for coming here. Mark from the US, Surendra, you come from Belgium, Lauren, Timo. Thank you very much, and have a nice remainder of the day. It was a great session. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, wir haben gehört, was alles geht. Und da ist Geld, es ist nicht ganz leicht ranzukommen. Von daher passt es eigentlich sehr gut, dass wir nach der Pause um 16:15 Uhr unsere Wirtschaftsministerin Mona Neubauer hier begrüßen dürfen. Und zu hören, wie sie die Weiterentwicklung dieses großen Gemeinschaftswerkes, das wir hier anstreben, Zusammenarbeit von Wirtschaft, Wissenschaft, Politik und Zivilgesellschaft sehen. Kurze Pause und um 16:15 Uhr geht es dann weiter.